The NFL Scouting Combine got its first events underway Thursday night. I stayed up to watch, and I made sure to stay up and wait to record this episode after I saw the full events to get you guys my instant reaction. It's going to be a solo show today here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, but I got you. Your host, Chris Carter, is going to walk you through what I saw with wide receivers and quarterbacks, especially because I think there were some interesting things that played out that could truly jumble up what's going to happen on the first day of the draft and definitely impact who will be available for the Steelers at the 20th overall pick, and maybe even change the idea or the plan that the Steelers have in place with their first round pick. We'll talk about all of that right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video. If you're enjoying it, hit the subscribe button to get all of our daily content, just like you can do anywhere on all the other podcasting platforms. We thank you for making us your first podcast listen every single day. Also, remember, if you want to help us out even further, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment, and you'll get a special shout out at the end of the show. Before we continue, I want to point out, because there have been some of our fans of the show and some of our loyal listeners of our Locked On listeners who have pointed out that there may have been some issues with Stitcher, the podcasting app. We're working to remedy that here. We're sorry if you haven't been getting them there. I understand what it's like having your favorite podcasting app, and when something's not loading, you don't switch to another one. I totally get that. I'm that way, but at the same time, just letting you know, it's not a me thing. These episodes are going up every day, so if you're catching this somewhere else, or someone else is having a problem with it, please let them know. Just switch to Apple, Spotify, or tell Stitcher, hey, what's wrong with this? Because we're uploading the same thing every day, and it has been no problems on my end. This is more, I think that's more of a Stitcher problem. But anyways, back to what we're talking about here. The Combine, it's underway. It's exciting. That was an electric first night. Now, for those who don't watch the Combine, and maybe this year tuned in a little bit more because you're concerned about the Steelers quarterback situation and you're picking it up, let me tell you, what you saw at the wide receiver position was not normal. 9 players ran under 4.40 in the 40-yard dash. Now, Wes and I talked about this. Tony and I talked about this. There are certain events in the Combine that do get overhyped, and the 40-yard dash is one of them. But when people run like that in lightning, it starts to turn heads. It changes people's minds. It says, hey, we might be thinking about this guy at this level. We might be thinking about this guy a little bit higher up. And it can either confirm or dispel rumors, ideas, and thoughts that teams had about certain receivers. And what I warned everyone about moving forward about this wide receiver class, that this wide receiver class is supposed to be deep, special, and is gonna be one that the Steelers should tap into at some point. But if some of these guys ran some serious 40-yard dash times, some of those guys that are first-round grades, maybe first-round grades, in that range, it could jump up a lot of guys ahead of where the Steelers pick. Now, again, the Steelers pick at 20th overall, and I think this is a very good thing for the Pittsburgh Steelers because, like I said before, if you're a Steelers fan, you want maybe you want a quarterback. B, you want an offensive tackle. C, you want a linebacker. You want a cornerback. You want one of these major skill position players, but you want the best one of those group, or you want a top 3 guy of those groups that fits that 20th overall spot that says, like, yeah, we got our guy. This guy's a pillar player for the next decade or so, or however long he'll be with the Steelers. And so you want positions that maybe you're not looking at in the first round to kind of do a little bit better so that they'll get propped up. And I think that's what happened at the wide receiver position. Now, it depends on where you rank guys. Some people have players ranked very differently. Like, for example, if you go to ESPN, they have Drake London, the USC wide receiver, 6'5". They have him as the best wide receiver available. If you look at their positional rankings and what their scouting department says, if you go to the draftnetwork.com, they have Jamison Williams, who's recovering from an injury. They have him as the best wide receiver out there. But ultimately, there are a lot of talented receivers. You include those two guys. You include Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, the two Ohio State guys. Traylon Burks, the big slot guy from Arkansas, 6'3", 225, kind of bigger, is able to bring in passes, not as fast. But then you also have Jahan Dotson of Penn State, and I truly think the guy that's putting himself in this conversation out of North Dakota State is Christian Watson. This guy's 6'5", jumps extremely high. Didn't have the highest vertical jump, but he was up there. Did have the best broad jump, which means he's extremely explosive, and he ran a sub 4.3 40-yard dash. Looking at these numbers here, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Excuse me. Here at sub 4.4, it was 4.36. I think they adjusted it for that. Now I'm not here to say that the fastest guys are the guys that go out, because we've seen plenty of guys like John Ross, the guy that Bengals picked in the first round years ago. I think he still has the fastest 40-yard dash time that's official, and you saw what happened with him. So Taekwon Thornton, exciting that he ran a 4.28 officially out of Baylor, but still not going to be a first round guy. Calvin Austin, the third, a guy who ran a 4.32, definitely boosted his stock, but not going to be up in that conversation. I will say Alec Pierce, a taller wide receiver who had the highest vertical jump, having a 4.33, a wide receiver out of Cincinnati. He could turn heads. He might be a guy that's snuck his way up into the second round. But the guys that I truly think could be those first round guys that push everybody else down, Garrett Wilson, who ran a 4.38, looks really good. Some people have him as maybe the best receiver of this class. Chris Olave, who ran a 4.39, both the Ohio State guys. That's lightning, and that's how good it was for C.J. Stroud this year at Ohio State. He had both of those guys to throw to all season long. That is a major advantage there. But you include both of those guys. Jahan Dotson didn't blow people out of the water, but still ran very good 40 times, still looked very solid. And in the pass catching drills, looked smooth as ever. And that's what you want to see out of you guys. And then there's still Traylon Burks, who didn't run too fast. He was kind of, averaging in the 4.5 range, but he's still big bodied, showed good hands, showed a lot of the things that you wanted to see from him. So you're talking about, even if you exclude Jameson Williams in his injury situation and what's going on with him, let's look at those guys. And Drake London not performing in these events. You still have Olave, Wilson, Dotson, Dotson, maybe London and Williams you throw out, but this Christian Watson kid, I mean, people were comparing him to Randy Moss. I thought that was a bit much. I loved his Senior Bowl tape. I loved some of his highlights that I was able to get my hands on for North Dakota State. But you see these numbers. I mean, he's up there with some of the best. Like I think he right now, according to StatHead.com, the official tracker of like combine data that they team up with Pro Football Reference, or they're under the Pro Football Reference like umbrella. Their combine stats, he would now have the 5th best ever broad jump by a wide receiver in NFL combine history. That's how explosive this guy is. He goes and gets the football. He looks really smooth. Now, I'm not saying that all these guys will definitely go before the Steelers pick, but the more that do, remember what I said earlier this week, the more that do, it starts to push down, the Devin Lloyd. It starts to push down, maybe Tyler Linderbaum. Maybe it pushes down, one of those cornerbacks that you really want. And then you're in a position where, like, hey, we never thought this guy would be here. Much like how I was talking with Wes Euler yesterday on the show. That's how the Steelers got Cam Hayward. There were runs at other positions, and they're like, we never thought we'd get a chance at a Cam Hayward. And they picked them up in 2011, and here we are in 2022, and he's one of Steeler Nation's favorite players. Now, that's a big impact that I think that this group has. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that all those guys go before the Steelers pick in the first 19 picks, but I have a hard time seeing a guy like Chris Olave and a guy like Garrett Wilson, both of them slipping down to where the Steelers pick, with all the teams that do. Every team needs, not every team, but most teams do need explosive wide receivers, and most teams are willing to go take those shots at them. But if there's 4 or 5 guys that can go before the Steelers pick, you throw in, 2 quarterbacks also being picked, 3 offensive tackles, the 2 top cornerbacks, the top safety. There's supposed to be like 4 or 5 edge rushers. You see what I'm talking about here? Like, eventually you start adding all that up, and then you're going to see some of those top other players that you're like, we never should have had a chance at that guy. And the Steelers being able to say, we can sprint to the podium and go get a top guy of a class that's pretty good, but got pushed down because everyone else was rushing into these positions. And that's what the 40-yard dash can do when you're looking at the NFL Scouting Combine. It was a spectacular first day when it comes to events and fun to watch. I think the Steelers also could consider wide receiver. I want to talk about that more in the second segment here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, because I do think that is something that shouldn't be overlooked, because their receiver position isn't exactly settled. But first, we're going to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Football might be over this season, but basketball is full steam ahead for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, betonline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news all season long. It's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your best source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, even down to NFL scouting combine get bets. If you want to bet on who's going to make the fastest 40 time, there was actually a good bet that you could have placed that any person in the NFL scouting combine was going to beat 4.29 as a 40-yard dash time. And because of Taekwon Thornton, he had a 4.28. That was already beat. So if you put money down on that, and I told you about that earlier this week right on the show, you made some money off of just watching the combine this Thursday. But there's a lot more to go. So do check out betonline.net, because they have a lot of different great offers for you to make money betting on sports. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our breakdown of the first day of the NFL Scouting Combine and how it impacts the Steelers' draft strategies and how things might play out. Now, before I get to quarterbacks, because I know a lot of people want to talk about that, but I had to leave with the wide receiver position. I want to point this out. I would not put it beyond the Steelers to go get a wide receiver this year. You remember when they picked Chase Claypool with their second round pick, which was their first pick of that draft, because they had traded away their first round pick to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. You remember when they did that, a lot of people were surprised, because they were like, wide receiver? Man, you got Juju, you got James Watson, you got Deontay. Why are you doing that? But they believe it'll keep young guys on the roster, keep explosive guys on the roster, guys that you think can be true talents. Chase Claypool had a phenomenal combine. Now, he had a really good rookie year. He didn't have as good of a second year, but those things happen. He could bounce back. But I would not put it past the Steelers if Kevin Colbert's sitting there and, if a Chris Olave, if a Garrett Wilson, if a Christian Watson, maybe even Jahan Dotson, if one of those guys is sitting there and you're thinking, man, that's a generational wide receiver potential right there, maybe they take that shot. And I know that's not what you want to hear, because you want an offensive lineman, you want a linebacker, you want a cornerback. And that's not me making fun of you if you want those guys, because I think they need them. But if you had a chance to have the next Randy Moss on your team and make things a lot easier for Mason Rudolph, I mean, if you remember Landry Jones coming in to replace Michael Vick against the Arizona Cardinals, I believe that was back in 2014, 2015, one of those seasons. And how helpless the Steelers looked with Michael Vick, and Landry Jones coming in didn't make it look too much better. But when he just hit Martavis Bryant on a slant, and the speed that he took off with to just crush the Cardinals, it changed the entire game. It made things so much easier for a Landry Jones, who by no means was a longtime NFL starter. He might even compare to what Mason Rudolph is to the Steelers now. But if you could get that kind of a player who doesn't have the questions of Martavis Bryant brought with marijuana, however you feel about marijuana, it shouldn't be as penalized as it is in the NFL. It was still obviously a problem. It still led to him working his way out of the league. But by all indications, I don't know of him. Maybe it's just because he played at North Dakota State and I don't know, and that might be on me, but I have never heard of anything bad about Christian Watson yet. And that was just my brief scanning through, reading about him. But if you could get a guy like that, wouldn't it be worth it? Wouldn't that kind of a game changer make things better for your offense? And and maybe it makes things easier for Mason, because now you could put Chase Claypool in the big slot role. You can have Deontay Johnson continue to work to be a separator. And if say you get a Christian Watson or one of these guys who could be a true burner, that if you leave him in one-on-one coverage, it's a big problem. Maybe that changes things for you. So just a thought to keep that in consideration. I wouldn't put it past the Steelers to make a decision like that. But of course, we have to talk about the quarterbacks, because they came in, and we know that we know the class. You've heard me talk about them a lot. Malik Willis out of Liberty, Kenny Pickett out of Pitt, Carson Strong out of Nevada, Sam Howell out of North Carolina, Matt Corral from Ole Miss didn't participate because he's still recovering from his injuries. Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati. My initial thoughts: Desmond Ridder, really good 40 time, ran a 4.5 flat. I think he actually got under a 4.5. I still have to check his official numbers. When looking at that, actually no, he ran a 4.52. Now that it's been made official, but that's really good, especially for a guy his size. He's a guy that's going to be coming into the NFL draft class at 6'3", 211. He has a decent arm. You're interested to see how he plays. That's cool. But everyone wants to know about Kenny Pickett now. Kenny Pickett and Malik Willis. Now, first of all, with Kenny Pickett, you got to acknowledge the hand size. I'm a person who I acknowledge that hand size. Of course, he got measured for 8.5 inches for his hand size. That's really small for NFL quarterbacks. There's no active NFL quarterback that's done that, and many say that the only successful quarterback with that official hand size, from the combine that's been successful has been Michael Vick, and of course, Michael Vick having a cannon and some of the best athleticism at the club we've ever seen at the quarterback position made that a moot point. But there's definitely concern there, and he was wearing his 2 gloves as he always does during the combine. And people are concerned, like, man, does that mean he won't be able to protect the ball? If you compare his fumble rates, and I don't have them right in front of me because I'm trying to cover several different points, but if you compare his fumble rates with his contemporaries, the other guys that are in this NFL draft class, it's actually pretty normal or even better than some of these other guys like Malik Willis, like Matt Corral, these guys who have better hand sizes. That's not my detriment on Kenny Pickett. So I'm not going to sit here and talk for 20 minutes about Kenny Pickett's hand size because I actually think that's way overstated. I think Kenny's biggest weakness, and it's not something that I'd say that should make him not be drafted. It's what we saw when he tried to throw the deep ball in these practices or in this combine, just like we saw in the Senior Bowl. His deep ball hangs a little bit. He doesn't get the right kind of velocity when you start talking about 30, 35, 40 yards downfield when there's a fly route. And if you look at his numbers in college, according to Pro Football Focus, his deep ball numbers were among the best in college football last year. Why? Because he chose the right decisions. And this is why I still say Kenny Pickett is QB1 of this class. He was the best at understanding when he had one-on-ones, and when he had one-on-ones, which side was the cornerback favoring? Which side was he shaded to? Because if the cornerback was on the back shoulder or on the left shoulder, he would lead his wide receiver to the right side. And if it was vice versa, if the guy was on the right shoulder, he'd lead him to the left side. And he made it so that, hey, you're behind him, or my receiver just has a step on you. I'm going to throw it. It's going to have air under it. My receiver is going to be able to get under it, but it's going to be at a place where they're still going to be favored to get it. That's something that Kenny Pickett did a great job of. He has a great on-field awareness. I think that his decision-making and his accuracy is, when it comes to short, intermediate, and when it starts to get to that early part of the deeper routes, that's where he's great. That's where he's the best of this class. But when you get to that deep ball, that's where the ball starts to hang on him. And in the NFL, when the ball hangs on you in those spots, that's when those college DBs, they're not like the NFL DBs that you're going to face. They'll close on those windows a lot faster. They'll make those windows a lot smaller, and it becomes much, much harder when you're putting the air under the ball to fit the ball in there into those tight passing spots. So my only thing with Kenny is that that's his biggest detriment. But here's where I still stand with Kenny Pickett. And again, I'm a guy who covered Pitt. I'm also a Pitt alum. I make no I don't hide anything about the fact that, like, hey, I grew up watching Pitt and rooting for Pitt. I went to Pitt. I cover Pitt. I've talked to Kenny all year. He's been a great interview. I'm not hiding that at all. I still think Kenny Pickett's going to be a guy that gets picked before the Steelers are up, because people are going to see that leadership. People are going to see that he is accurate. People are going to see his decision making, and they're going to say, we want that guy on our team. And if he comes down to 20, the Steelers shouldn't just blow past him. They should definitely consider him comparing with who else they have on their big board from other positions. But I am saying that if you want to have a guy who stretches the field, if you want to have that complete quarterback, I'm not so sure Kenny is that. But I do think that there's plenty of teams out there like the Saints who run offenses that have been designed over the past few years that would work perfectly for a system and not put him in the situation where he has to be able to hit that deep ball consistently. But again, I make him QB1. Why? Because when I look at this class, there's nobody that puts it all together. And this is why no one's hyping up this quarterback class. Carson Strong, I thought he threw the best deep ball in this combine when it came to this. And again, these are against air. It's not This isn't life or death. This is just, hey, this is us getting to see, another look at you in this situation. But Carson Strong, I thought he threw the best deep ball, but some of his shorter passes weren't as accurate. His timing looked a little bit off. He's not as mobile. He's not as athletic as the other guys. Malik Willis had a cannon on him. He could launch that ball, but his deep ball wasn't as accurate or as on point as Carson Strong. And I thought there were some passes that you could see the zip coming out of his pass when they ran slants and they ran curls, but the placement was a little bit off. That's where I start to wonder, about Malik Willis. He's also not the complete package. I think he has a higher ceiling than Kenny Pickett because he's faster, because he can launch the ball further, but he doesn't have the footwork that Kenny Pickett has. He doesn't have the accuracy that Kenny Pickett has, and those two are very much hand in hand a lot of times. That's where I'm seeing I'm not so sure if this is the move here. Now, again, if either one of them fall to 20, it's certainly a big question. It's like, do you look at that guy? But if those guys are sitting there at 20 and like one of those top offensive tackles somehow fell to you, one of those, Devin Lloyd, a super linebacker or a super corner that you never thought would fall to you, one of those guys are sitting there, and you can get a guy who might be among the best of his position in the NFL when he grows into it. You can get that guy at an important skill position and then wait to get that quarterback who could be in that upper tier in the NFL, or you can get this guy now at quarterback like Kenny Pickett, like Malik Willis, who maybe they could get there, but they project more to be like guys like, hey, when they mature, they'll be in the middle tier of the NFL. You'll have a starting quarterback, you'll have a guy that you could trust and a guy that you can win games with. And that's what Kevin Cole was talking about. Like, there are several starting quarterbacks in this class, but are there franchise quarterbacks? Are there legendary quarterbacks? Are there guys that you say, that's the man, that's the guy who's going to carry this franchise to another Super Bowl? Those are the questions I think that you got to ask yourselves when you're looking at these quarterbacks. And those are the questions I think the Steelers are asking themselves right now when they're looking at these guys perform. I want to talk more about when and where they should get this quarterback, as well as how everything could play out the rest of this weekend. The NFL scouting combine, you still got offensive linemen, defensive linemen, linebackers, defensive backs. It's going to get crazy this weekend. There's going to be a lot of athleticism on display. It's going to be fun to watch, but I want to get you prepared for other aspects I think you should be thinking about when you're looking at the guys that you want the Steelers to take, not just in the first round, but also in the second and third rounds. We'll get to that in just a second here. But first, I got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. Built Bar is, of course, the amazing protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And if you're struggling to keep up with your New Year's resolutions, if you're not keeping up with your diets, Built Bar is here to help you out. Why? Because it tastes amazing. You'll enjoy eating them, but they'll also be good for you. If you haven't tried the new Puffs flavors, I suggest you check them out because you're missing out big. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, marshmallowy, and they're not just a protein bar, they're a treat. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. They have several different flavors, whether it's yummy cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. All try them out at built.com because they're amazing. And just like every other Built bar, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. And all Built bars, they're healthier for you. Why? Because they only have 130 calories. They only have 4 grams of sugar, only 4 net carbs, but they pack 17 grams of protein. Compare that to the average candy bar that has 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. That's such a better option for you. And there's so many flavors of Built bars to try if you want to see what your favorite is. Is it peanut butter brownie, coconut almond, raspberry, double chocolate, cookies and cream? That's my favorite. Salted caramel, mint brownie, all those flavors available when you go to built.com and check out Built bars. And they're introducing new flavors every single month. So go to built.com to find your favorite flavor of Built bar and get it delivered right to your door. But before you do that, make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order of Built bars at built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We are talking about the NFL scouting combine that's well underway. Now, again, the first night's over. I've talked about receivers. One receiver I know some people are probably talking about that I didn't even mention yet is Skye Moore. Skye Moore lit it up. When I look at his combine, numbers, I think he had a 4.39, a 4, because initially he had one. I'm trying, my numbers here are actually getting jumbled up. I'm trying to pull them back up here, but There we go. We got some numbers back here. He were 4.41 was his official time. But Skye Moore out of Western Michigan, a guy that we talked about. He's from Pittsburgh, went to Shadyside Academy, caught passes from Mike Tomlin's son in high school. Has obvious ties. Talked to the Steelers. They love him, and he loves them. And there definitely could be some synergy here. But here's the thing: at 4.41 time, he's showing off in those catching drills. That's also going to bump his stock up. Now, I'm not saying first round, but I'm not so sure that he's going to, like, a lot of Steelers fans who do those mock drafts. By the way, don't forget, Mock Draft Monday will be back on Monday. So check the Locked On Steelers Facebook group and you can submit your mock draft to see if your mock draft gets featured on the show. But for Skye Moore, a lot of people have been mocking him to the Steelers in the third round, and it fits perfectly because before he was third, fourth round receiver, smaller guy, really quick, kind of explosive. You like what he brings to the table, but he's not wide receiver one material, so you'll pick him in the third or fourth rounds, and so it works out. But when people saw his tape, there's a lot of people that started to say, "Oh, that's not third round material. That's like maybe high second. Like if you pass on him in the first round, you might not get him in the second round if you're the Steelers at that next pick." So that's a serious question. Is that going to be part of this? But again, when guys like that are moving up, you can see this is a deep wide receiver class with the guys that are available right now. I mean, you can still get that Calvin Austin guy, the third from Memphis. He was flying. That's a guy that's another guy that you could put there. And again, he's 5'9", not a big guy, but really fast, and speed kills in the NFL. The Steelers could use some separator speed. He's one of those guys to look at. Alec Pierce, he's a big dude who was flying and was getting up. That's another guy. Third, he's a guy you could still pick third or fourth round. So if you still want to get a Steelers wide receiver, but you're not sure about getting in the first round, and you're not sure if you can get Skye Moore anymore, that option is still available. I'd also say the same thing about quarterback. I thought Desmond Ridder didn't look great, but looked good enough to say, hey, you know what? Second or third round, you're sitting around there. We already got another key position locked down in the first round. He might be worth a look. He has the size. He has the look that you want as far as the build. You can work with him. He's in the 6'3", 6'4" range. That's a guy that I think that when you look at how he's built, he ran a 4.52 in his 40-yard dash. He officially listed at 6.3 or 6'3". That's a guy who he looked like a leader. He looked composed. You could definitely bring him in and say, hey, we don't think he's first round material. You're not Kenny Pickett. You're not Malik Willis in that first round grade that people are talking about. But if you're in that second round, if you're in that third round, that's a legitimate place you could consider taking a guy like that. And you never know. Maybe they're Russell Wilson. Maybe they're Mason Rudolph. You don't know. But the point is that you do want to add a young arm to this mix. I do think the Steelers are definitely playing. That's why they're talking to all the quarterbacks, not just the Sam Howells, not just the Kenny Pickett's or the Matt Corrals or the Malik Willises. They're talking to Desmond Ridder, and they only talked to him twice. I believe. So far, but they got a good look at him at the Senior Bowl. So I think the Steelers, they're kind of spreading it around. It's spreading out their love for who they're trying to figure out at quarterback. But those are the guys that you're looking at the quarterback position. If you wait any later, I think we saw in this draft, the guys, Carson Strong, big arm, can throw it down the field. Not sure if he puts all the other things together, but certainly another guy that you could take in the third-ish, fourth-ish rounds and say, okay, maybe a shot like that. The Bailey Zappies, I think he didn't shine the way that he needed to help boost his stock. Those are, again, guys, like if you haven't gotten a quarterback by the fourth round and you don't have a pick in the fifth round, you're sitting there. Those are guys like Bailey Zappi, Caleb Ellaby. Those are the guys you'll take we'll just bring you in and see what happens in the NFL. Because maybe you make the practice squad, maybe you make the third string. Who knows? But quarterback position is still certainly in play for the Steelers. But again, what you're going to be looking at with these, I just talked how the 40 time impacted how people looked at wide receivers. Watch how it impacts cornerback, linebackers, the broad jump with those edge rushers. Like I said, those edge rushers, there's the Steelers, they could get an edge rusher, I'd say, in the second, third, fourth rounds, trying to get some depth behind TJ and Alex. That would be awesome, right? But they don't need to go after any of these guys that are going in the first round. If you look at the Draft Network, they got Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, Jermaine Johnson, Trayvon Walker, David Ohabo from Michigan. You got five guys, and excuse me, George Karlaftis from Purdue. That's six guys they have slated to the first round 4 of them they have slated as valued above the Steelers' 20th overall pick. Those are all, again, if you got 4 edge rushers, you got 4 wide receivers, you get 2 quarterbacks, maybe 3 offensive tackles. You see where I'm going with this? Again, that's 15 or 16 picks right there. We still haven't talked about 2 cornerbacks, a safety, those type of guys. And all of a sudden you're sitting there saying, wait a second, is that top guy at another position going to be available? Can you get the best linebacker? Can you get the 3rd best offensive tackle? Can you get the best center, the best guard? There's all those positions that the Steelers could absolutely need right now, or even, again, the 3rd cornerback. If you get the 3rd string quarterback this year, and that's Ahmad Gardner or Trent McDuffie or Roger McCree, whoever you think it is, you're swimming in success with that draft pick, or at least, hope and optimism with that draft pick. There's a lot of things that are still open, but again, things can be shaken up. Imagine if one of those top corners runs a bad 40 time and people don't like it, or it has a bad shuttle, or a bad bad this, bad that. People, their stock drops. Imagine some of those guys that are on the edge. They say Roger McCree for Auburn runs a ridiculous 40 time. Maybe he puts himself up in that conversation. Those are the things that you're watching for in the NFL draft. Do not, and this is what I tell Steelers fans all the time, do not overbuy into something. Like, you see a 40-yard dash, and I get the instinct, because when I was younger and I was like in high school and college and whatnot, I was like, oh man, look at that. Oh, you got to get that guy. Remember, everything is part of a puzzle. You don't want to just commit to one specific guy just because you like this 40 time, or you like this vertical jumper, you like this broad jumper, you like this 3-cone time if he's an edge rusher. You want to put it all together. But the key thing here is, how is this going to impact their stock? And if their stock is rising or falling, you keep track of that with all the other positions, and you see, where can the Steelers get the best available player? That's how they still operate. Their best drafts come when they say, hey, stay best available player in the draft. And if it matches your needs, great. If not, you see about still taking that best available player and how he might help your team right away. Trade back, see what else happens, or find other ways to make it work. But I do think the Steelers have a great opportunity this year to get that best available player, that best overall player available to them, and have it being one of those top guys. This is, again, why I said the Steelers should pick Najee Harris, because I knew that offensive tackle was going to fly off the board. Guard was going to fly off the board. This position, that position, this position, that position. And I know people were saying, oh, you never drafted running back in the first round. I'm like, yeah, but when it's that guy, and he gets 1,600 all-purpose yards in his first year with like 10 touchdowns, with no offensive line and no deep passing game to help him, I think you can get a guy who's the best of his position in a draft class. That's where, at an important position that you need to improve, that's important. And I think that opportunity may be here for the Steelers, but at a position that I think people will be more favorable with. If you don't like the running back position, you might say, oh yeah, a linebacker, that might work. A cornerback, that might work. Those are the things that might be available to the Steelers in the rest of this NFL draft. And a lot of it can be set up in the scouting combine, where teams are still meeting with players, formal interviews, informal interviews. All of that is coming right out of Indianapolis. Do follow everyone who's there. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm actually at the Pitt football facility here in Pittsburgh on the south side, covering those. So I'll be bringing to you, if you're a Pitt football fan, I'll be bringing to you any spring practice notes on how they're reloading to repeat as ACC champions. But that's why I bring on people like Wesley Euler. We're looking to have on Brooke Pryor again on ESPN. She's been down there. That's why we bring on people like Mark Caboli, people that are down there, get to see things for themselves, get they got their boots on the ground, and they're learning what's happening there. They're seeing things up close, and we'll bring that to you right here in the Locked On Steelers podcast by interviewing more of those people that are doing just that. Stay tuned. It's going to be a fun weekend for the NFL scouting combine, watching events, keeping up with things. Even if you don't necessarily watch them, just keeping up with them, just saying like, oh, hey, I remember that guy. That was the guy that we were talking about on the show about maybe that guy can be there in the 2nd or 3rd round. We'll be talking about all those things next week when the combine's done. We get all the official numbers, and there's no more guessing or waiting. It's seeing how things actually played out and how it affects the stocks, and see, all right, where are things going from here? Who's being valued where? And we start to talk about pro days, as some of those college players now go back to their colleges and do one more performance for NFL teams to come and visit. And that's when the fun truly starts, because then we see who the Steelers are actually paying attention to. We'll break that down as the offseason continues here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But we thank you for joining us here on the show today. Again, if you're watching us on YouTube, hit the like button. It really helps us out. Hit the subscribe button to get all of our daily content here on our YouTube channel. You can also subscribe to us if you prefer audio version on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, hopefully Stitcher if they get their stuff together. But all those different ways are available to you. If you want to help out the show, go and check us out. But also give us a 5-star review with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts. You do all of that, you get a special shout out at the end of the show. We've been giving a bunch recently because so many of you have been coming in and leaving 5-star reviews with positive comments. That stuff really helps get the word out about what we're doing here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Have a great weekend. I'm going to go see the Batman movie this weekend. I just hope DC stops messing things up. But again, that's off topic. But I'm Chris Carter here. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. We hope that you enjoyed the show. Be back on your screens and in your ears Monday with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers and what happened at the NFL Scouting Combine.